Hey guys, tonight we're slipping past the ticking of your bedside clock into the soft glow where dreams used to begin. Not in your phone screen, not in a Netflix pause frame, but beneath the slow flicker of candlelight. The night smells faintly of beeswax and lavender oil. Somewhere, lace curtains breathe against the window pane, and you can almost hear the faint rustle of petticoats. You're about to step into the rooms where women once unwound, layer by layer, from the world's expectations. Spoiler alert, you probably won't survive wearing half the things they did. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from and what time is it there? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing in a bedroom lit by the stub of a candle. Shadows move like living things, and each sound, a floorboard creak, a breath, a heartbeat, feels magnified. This is the late 18th century, maybe early 19th. You reach for a ribbon, unlace a bodice, and realize that what you're doing isn't just getting ready for bed. It's shedding the armor society demanded you wear all day. The ritual of undressing was its own kind of ceremony. Women spent their days bound by etiquette, corsetry, and conversation, each gesture rehearsed for public consumption. But at night they could exhale. A chemise fell to the floor, the corset loosened with a sigh that probably echoed through history louder than any speech. It wasn't just about comfort, it was about control. Historians still argue whether these nightly rituals were acts of passive conformity or subtle defiance. Was the nightly toilette a reinforcement of vanity or a rare moment of self-possession? Whatever the truth, each brushstroke through tangled hair, each sigh into a down pillow was part of an ancient choreography of rest. You imagine a young woman in Georgian London. She's been painted and powdered for hours, corseted until her ribs ached. Now she sits before her dressing table, brushing her hair exactly 100 times, because someone in her grandmother's generation said it stimulates the blood. Maybe it's nonsense, maybe it's science, but mostly it's meditation. Her maid hums softly. The candle flickers. The world outside, the markets, the gossip, the endless expectations, melts into wax and wick. You try it yourself. Run a brush through your own hair slowly like it's an ancient ritual. Feel that small defiance against the pace of the world. In that moment, you understand what it meant to keep night rather than conquer it. By the way, fun fact, wealthy women in Renaissance Florence sometimes slept with perfumed leather gloves to keep their hands soft and scented by morning. The formula usually included rosewater, musk, and a hint of civet, yes, from an actual civet cat. Please do Google that before bed. It's strange, isn't it? Comfort and cruelty twined together in one glove. Meanwhile, in the colder corners of medieval Europe, the night shift was literal. A linen tunic that people wore to bed, often shared between couples or family members. Privacy was a luxury, so was rest. In big stone houses, you'd have people snoring, coughing, and dreaming side by side, the air thick with wood smoke. You'd curl closer to the warmth because rest wasn't just pleasure, it was survival. But something changes as the centuries roll on. Rest stops being communal and starts becoming private. The bedchamber, once just a room among others, transforms into a sanctuary. Curtains appear. Lace veils drape across beds. The bedroom becomes a stage for solitude, and for women, that's revolutionary. By the late 19th century, the phrase, "a lady's private sitting room," appears in architecture plans. It's a coded signal, a space where she can read, write, or just be. You can imagine the thrill of closing a door and not having to explain yourself. The candle flickers lower. You see how the act of dimming the light itself was an aesthetic choice. Light meant exposure. Shadow meant control. Those shadows under the lace curtains weren't empty. They were alive with thought, dream, and memory. Now here's your quirky tidbit for tonight. In certain corners of 17th century France, upper-class women hosted midnight salons. tiny gatherings held in bedchambers after everyone else had retired. They'd discuss literature, philosophy, and sometimes scandalous political ideas, all while technically preparing for sleep. Imagine plotting social reform in your nightgown, cozy and revolutionary. There's something beautifully ironic about that, isn't there? Society told women to be still, to be silent, to rest, and they turned stillness into strategy. You trace your finger over an embroidered pillowcase, maybe stitched by a girl who never signed her name on anything else in her life. Her initials are hidden among the flowers, a secret rebellion of thread. That's how women left marks in a world that tried to make them invisible, stitch by stitch, side by side, through rituals that looked like obedience but felt like freedom. Outside, the night deepens. You think about how we've lost the patience for this kind of unwinding. We fall asleep with screens glowing, eyes buzzing from blue light, bodies coiled from caffeine. Those candle-lit women might have envied our modern comfort, but not our restlessness. If you close your eyes, you can almost hear the scratch of a quill, the whisper of linen, the soft exhale of someone who's finally alone. There's no Wi-Fi, no deadlines, just a heartbeat and the sound of dreams forming in the dark. And somewhere through the lace, the moonlight presses gently against the wall like a curious guest. The night, it seems, has been watching women reclaim their time for centuries. You settle deeper into that idea, that rest isn't laziness, it's legacy. Each sigh, each breath, each slow undoing of the day is a message to the body that says, you still belong to yourself. So tonight, as you pull your own blanket close, maybe remember that the velvet night has always been more than sleep. It's been a mirror, a secret, a small rebellion beneath a curtain of lace. The corset on the chair still holds its shape, like a ghost of discipline. You glance at it and can almost hear its sigh, stitched from whale bone, ribbon, and social expectation. Tonight, you loosen the stays and slip into a softer rhythm, the kind that comes when secrets finally have space to breathe. Every woman of the past carried secrets like stitches in her bodice, tight, deliberate, hidden in plain sight. You, too, tug at those strings and feel the same relief they must have felt. The ribs expanding, the shoulders falling, the body remembering itself. Beneath the lace and linen, beneath all that historical choreography, lived a pulse that refused to obey the clock or the crowd. In the soft lamplight of a Victorian room, you can see her, somewhere between exhaustion and imagination. Her name could be Charlotte, Ada, Mary, or someone history never cared to name. She's unlacing her corset, one hook at a time, and beside her dressing mirror lies something far more dangerous than her perfume bottle, a diary with a lock. That tiny key might as well be a weapon. The diary holds what society forbade, a woman's interior world, desires, doubts, dreams, and the occasional complaint about men who thought Latin made them smarter. Historians still argue whether these diaries were simply emotional outlets or coded manifestos of identity. Maybe both. Maybe they were just the one space where truth didn't need an audience. You open one of those diaries in your mind, the ink fading but the emotion still raw. The handwriting curves like lace, careful but alive. One entry reads, "I wish to rest not as a duty but as a right." The year, 1823. The location, unknown. But that sentence feels startlingly modern. You probably don't think of the corset as a political object, but oh, it was. It was the body turned into architecture. Doctors wrote pamphlets against it, etiquette guides defended it, husbands admired it, women endured it. And yet, when the bedroom door closed, when the strings loosened, the act of removing it became its own small revolution. Here's your mainstream fact for the night. The average Victorian corset could reduce the waist by 3 to 6 inches. Some extreme versions, like the infamous wasp waist designs, went even further, reshaping ribs over time. Women fainted, yes, but mostly from heat and dehydration, not vanity. The body adapted, because women always do. Now for something a bit more eccentric. There was a brief fad in the 1890s for ventilated corsets. Tiny perforations and even wire mesh panels were advertised as the ultimate comfort innovation. Spoiler, nothing about steel mesh against your ribs feels comfortable. But it tells you something important. Even when trapped by fashion, people were still looking for a loophole, literally. You lean closer to the mirror. The glass in older mirrors was often silvered with mercury, so reflections shimmered with a kind of ghostly distortion. It's unsettling but poetic, how women saw themselves through something toxic and imperfect, kind of like every Instagram filter you've ever used. She, our quiet diarist, might have stared into that same warped reflection and wondered who she was beneath the lace. And maybe that's why she wrote, hiding her thoughts under the pillow or behind false book covers. Some even stitched small pouches into corsets to smuggle letters or coins, because when your clothes are your prison, you make them your hiding place too. You can imagine her sitting on her bed, brushing a curl away from her cheek, then leaning over to write. The corset is not the enemy, but the proof of what must be endured. Then she'd blow out the candle. Silence would fall, except for the faint ticking of her heart against the soft pillow. Outside that room, the world had rules, strict, heavy, patriarchal rules. But in the dark, beneath lace curtains, the mind moved differently. Women learned to think between the stitches, to dream between the pages. And every secret, every line of ink was a form of rest. The mental kind, the emotional kind, the kind you don't schedule but simply surrender to. Historians still argue whether privacy was ever truly possible in those centuries. Between servants, family, and social obligations, a woman's solitude was a fragile luxury. But even a minute stolen for reflection, while unlacing, while writing, while pretending to sleep, was a moment of freedom. Here's a little-known gem for you. In the 1700s, women sometimes sewed tiny keepsakes or love notes into the linings of their corsets. These were called heart tokens, and no one was meant to find them. A scrap of fabric, a word like courage or hope stitched in red thread, a secret close enough to the heart to outlast time. You smile. Maybe we're not so different. We keep digital heart tokens, now hidden photos, playlists, drafts we'll never post. The technology's new, the instinct is. The need to hide a soft truth in a hard world is timeless. You pull the lace curtain slightly aside. The air outside is cool. Somewhere beyond the window, a city hums, horses on cobblestones or cars on asphalt. It doesn't matter. The sound has always been the same, life moving while you pause. That's what these women understood long before we had words like self-care or boundaries. The body, after all, keeps the score, but it also keeps the memory. Every loosened corset, every sigh, every secret written and hidden, those were small acts of reclamation. And maybe that's what makes rest so radical. It's not just sleeping or stopping, it's remembering who you are when no one's watching. You stretch, you breathe, you let your chest expand fully. You exist in your body without apology. That was the dream beneath the lace curtain all along. Outside, a soft wind trembles through the fabric. The candle burns lower, and in that warm, flickering light, you realize something gentle but true. Even silence leaves a mark. Steam rises in soft ribbons. You trail your fingers through it and the air smells faintly of rosewater, maybe almond milk, maybe the faint mineral scent of iron tubs. You're here for the kind of history that slips under the skin, the story of women who found liberation in something as simple and as radical as hot water. You step into the bathhouse. It's late evening in ancient Rome, or perhaps a modest Parisian apartment in the 1890s. The details blur, as all good dreams do. The marble or porcelain, the echo of dripping water, the hush of voices. Every age had its version of the bath, and every bath held the same promise: rest not as passivity, but purification. You kneel to test the water. It's warm, silky, and laced with herbs. Maybe lavender, maybe thyme. These aren't just scents, they're spells of survival. Women bathe not just to clean the body, but to scrub away everything the world had layered upon them. Dust, duty, despair, all rinsed into the drain. There's a reason ancient texts often linked bathing to rebirth. Even the mythic Aphrodite was said to have emerged from sea foam, cleansed by salt and moonlight. The ritual carried forward for centuries. By the 18th century, European women were reviving the practice, though more privately. Small copper tubs hidden behind screens, or shared bathhouses where conversation mixed with steam. Your mainstream fact for tonight. In Victorian England, bath nights were usually once a week for most families. The eldest or wealthiest bathed first, followed by everyone else in the same water. Hygiene was hierarchy, but for women that once-a-week soak could feel like a tiny revolution, a whole hour of being alone with one's body, without judgment. The air hums. You dip a cloth into the water and imagine that sensation against your skin, a language older than comfort. Some women added milk to their baths, believing it would soften their skin and preserve youth. Cleopatra made it famous, of course, though historians still argue whether she actually used donkey milk or if that was a later exaggeration. Either way, someone somewhere was standing in a warm pool of decadence, believing in softness as survival. You glance up and see another woman across the steam, perhaps in Edo-era Japan, wrapped in a cotton yukata, lowering herself into an ofuro. The water nearly scalds, that's the point. Heat draws out fatigue and silence soaks into the bones. These baths weren't just physical, they were spiritual resets. Shinto beliefs tied purification to moral balance, and though few said it aloud, women's evening baths were often their only private moment in an entire day spent serving others. Back in Europe, the 19th century saw a strange transformation. The bath became fashionable again, but only in certain social circles. Doctors wrote anxious essays about women overbathing for pleasure rather than hygiene. Yes, someone actually thought that was a moral crisis. Yet women kept bathing in quiet defiance, turning the act into ritual. And here's your quirky tidbit. In 1770s Paris, perfumed bath sachets were sold in apothecaries, tiny linen bags filled with herbs, flowers, and sometimes crushed pearls. Pearls, can you imagine? Historians found recipes calling for violet petals, ground almonds, and dried orange peel. It was expensive, yes, but it was also art. Self-care, centuries before hashtags. The bath, it seems, was both sanctuary and stage. There's a painting by Edgar Degas, women bathing, their backs turned, skin glowing like candlelight. The world called it voyeurism, the artist called it realism. But look closer and you'll see something else. The quiet, unperformed intimacy of women simply being. You sink lower into the imagined water, listening to it lap softly against the sides. Each ripple feels like a memory, the hum of Roman fountains, the creak of a copper tub, the laughter echoing through Turkish hammams. You see tiled walls and mosaic floors carved with stars, fish, and vines. In Ottoman hammams, women gathered to scrub, gossip, pray, and plot marriages or business deals. It was social, sensual, and deeply political, one of the few spaces where men were not allowed. Historians still argue whether those hammams were truly liberating or simply extensions of social surveillance. But for the women inside, wrapped in steam and secrecy, it hardly mattered. In that moment, their skin belonged only to themselves. You let the steam blur your vision and think of all the small luxuries we rush through today. The 5-minute shower, the multitasking shampoo moment. But for them, bathing was deliberate, a pause in time. Every drop of scented oil was a declaration. I exist in this body and I will care for it. In medieval Europe, of course, the church made things complicated. Bathing too often was sometimes considered vanity, even sin. Monks and priests warned that warm water stirred temptation. Imagine being so afraid of comfort that you declare it heresy. Yet even then, women found ways. They'd heat water quietly at night, mix it with wine or herbs, and wash by candlelight. Small rebellions soaked in secrecy. Here's a story that lingers with you. In the 1600s, a noblewoman in Venice reportedly installed a private bath in her home and filled it with rose petals and perfume each night. Servants gossiped, clergy scolded, but she didn't care. She called it her hour of forgiveness. When asked what she meant, she said, It's when I forgive the world for asking too much. You tilt your head back and let that sink in. The idea that rest could be an act of mercy, not toward oneself, but toward everyone who demanded your energy. The bath wasn't escape, it was equilibrium. As the water cools, you notice the play of light on its surface, the way the candlelight quivers like a heartbeat. The lace curtain flutters. Somewhere, someone else is undressing, unburdening, unlearning. It's all part of the same story, 1,000 nights of women reclaiming softness, drop by drop. You close your eyes. The water hums against your skin, and you realize something lovely. Rest isn't always stillness. Sometimes it's the movement of water carrying everything heavy away. Outside, dawn is hours away, but the night feels endless. You stay in that liminal space, floating between centuries, between bodies, between selves. The steam rises like memory, and for once, you don't rush to wipe the mirror clear. You let it blur. You let it breathe. Because beneath the lace curtain and beneath the surface of the bath, you find the same truth women have known for centuries. That peace can be practiced, not just hoped for. The mirror wavers in candlelight, and for a moment it feels alive, breathing with you, reflecting not just your face but your fatigue. A small jar of powder sits nearby, a rouge pot beside it, and a puff of scent lingers in the air, part rosewater, part regret. Tonight, you're not just washing away the day. You're painting a boundary between who the world expects you to be and who you quietly are beneath the powder. Cosmetics have always carried that tension between performance and power. You dip a fingertip into a pot of white lead, don't worry. You're just imagining it, please, no home experiments. The creamy texture goes on smooth, brightening the face, but beneath that pale perfection lies the cost. Headaches, skin lesions, even death. And yet, for centuries, women reached for it anyway because beauty wasn't vanity, it was currency. You can almost hear the brush whispering across skin in a Tudor dressing room. Queen Elizabeth I sits before her mirror, her face a mask of alabaster. The iconic mask of youth, they called it, a mix of vinegar, white lead, and egg whites. Her courtiers copied it, her rivals mocked it, and physicians warned against it, but the ritual endured. Historians still argue whether Elizabeth believed the makeup itself gave her authority, or whether it was the act of applying it, the transformation from woman to legend, that kept her in control. You dab a touch of rouge on your cheek, tracing her same gesture. There's something ancient in it, the human instinct to mark oneself, to rewrite the face before the world does it for you. Powder and paint weren't about deceit. They were about agency. A way of saying, if I'm going to be looked at, I'll decide how. Now for your mainstream fact. By the late 18th century, cosmetic use had become a public controversy. In 1770, the British Parliament debated a ridiculous anti-painting bill that claimed any woman who used cosmetics to seduce a man into marriage could have the marriage annulled. The idea was laughable and unenforceable, but it revealed something deeper. The terror of women controlling their own image. You lean closer to your mirror. The room around you smells faintly of cold cream and violet powder, that powdery scent that feels like nostalgia itself. In the 19th century, beauty manuals became bestsellers. Titles like The Toilet of Flora or The Lady's Companion to Health and Beauty promised secrets from ancient Greece or Persia. But what they were really selling was a form of permission. To spend time alone, to care for oneself, to look without apology. And here's your quirky tidbit. In the early 1900s, some women secretly made face creams out of spermaceti, yes, whale oil, mixed with almond oil and beeswax. The recipe was passed around in coded notes between friends, hidden in cookbooks or sewing patterns. Imagine explaining that to your skincare influencer today. But beneath the chemistry and absurdity, there's something tender. The mirror ritual wasn't always vanity. Sometimes it was confession. A woman might lean close to her reflection and whisper the things she couldn't write in a diary. The face staring back wasn't an enemy. It was the only person who truly knew her exhaustion. Historians still argue whether cosmetics empowered or oppressed. Were they a tool of patriarchy or rebellion? The truth, as usual, lies in the flicker of candlelight, somewhere between both. Because in those quiet minutes before bed, women weren't performing for anyone. They were reclaiming the gaze for themselves. You glance across time and see Marie Antoinette, her cheeks a theatrical flush, her lips painted with crushed cochineal insects, yes, actual beetles. But let's call it organic pigment to feel better about it. To her, beauty was diplomacy. Each morning, her toilette ceremony was attended by half the French court, watching her get dressed, powdered, painted. Privacy was replaced by performance, and yet she kept a small secret. At night, she'd remove the makeup herself in silence, dismissing her ladies-in-waiting early. For a queen, that was the only hour of autonomy she owned. You laugh softly, thinking how not much has changed. We still curate faces for the world and then peel them off before bed, exhaling. Different tools, same yearning. A light joke for you. Historians once claimed that early 20th century women used lemon juice as a skin toner. Somewhere out there, someone definitely rubbed citrus on their face and went into the sun thinking they'd glow. Spoiler, they glowed red. SPF, darling, SPF. But the truth runs deeper than the recipes. Powder and paint were about boundaries, the daily creation and erasure of self. Each layer applied and removed said, I can reinvent, I can disappear, I can return. In a way, every jar of cold cream was also a diary. You dip your fingers in, massage circles over your face, watching the day dissolve. In those moments, women learn to look at themselves without performing, to meet their reflection without judgment. The lace curtain shivers beside you. The mirror catches its movement, and for a heartbeat, you see your reflection framed in it, half shadow, half glow. You realize that what history calls beauty rituals were often the only spaces women had to meditate, to touch themselves with kindness, to observe without commentary. Here's a tiny fringe fact. In parts of Renaissance Italy, women believed that washing the face by moonlight made the complexion luminous. So they'd open windows, let the moon fall across their skin, and wait. Maybe superstition, maybe poetry, but doesn't it sound lovely? You imagine that scene now. A woman standing at her window, barefaced, moonlit, free from corset and expectation. For once, she isn't painting over herself. She's resting, reflecting, reclaiming. Outside, the night folds softly around her. The mirror on the vanity still gleams faintly, catching both faces, the one she wears and the one she hides. And you see her clearly now, through time and lace and powdered air. You see that her beauty routine was never really about looking good. It was about remembering she existed. So you reach up, wipe a speck of invisible powder from your cheek, and whisper her quiet mantra to yourself. I am more than what the mirror shows. You draw the lace curtains closed, and the air inside the room changes, thickens, hushes. The bed sits at the center like a small, private world, its canopy drooping like a silk cloud. You trail a hand over the coverlet, it's smooth and cool, embroidered with vines and initials that feel more like prayers than decoration. This is where everything happens. Rest, birth, love, death, and all the quiet revolutions in between. The bed is not furniture tonight, it's territory. You kneel beside it, feeling the low creak of wood, the smell of lavender sachets tucked beneath the pillows, the ghost warmth of 1,000 dreams. For centuries, the bed has been both a throne and a cell for women. It's where queens gave orders and peasants gave birth. It's where exhaustion became a form of labor and rest a fleeting kind of power. You sit at the edge and it sighs under your weight. The sheets whisper stories, linen spun by tired fingers, stitched by candlelight, washed in rivers. You think of medieval women who didn't even own their bedding. It belonged to the household, the husband, the dowry ledger. Yet when night came, it was their one space of control. They could decide which side to sleep on, how to arrange the blankets, when to turn away. That small geography of softness mattered more than anyone admitted. Your mainstream fact. In medieval Europe, the marital bed was often the witness of contracts, literally. Couples consummated marriage publicly observed by attendants, sometimes with a priest's blessing at the bedside. Privacy wasn't assumed. It had to be earned over generations. And so, by the 18th century, when lace curtains finally closed and doors began to lock, women cherished that seclusion fiercely. You slip under the imagined canopy. The fabric above you breathes in rhythm with your own chest. Lace was more than luxury, it was language. It filtered light, softened sound, blurred boundaries. Historians still argue whether those curtains symbolized protection or possession. Were they meant to shelter women or hide them? Maybe both. But oh, how they gleamed when morning sunlight struck them, delicate nets of gold, thread, and shadow. They turned the bed into a stage and the sleeper into something divine. Beneath lace, a woman could finally vanish into herself. You lie back and time folds. You're in a Renaissance chamber now, all velvet drapes and polished walnut. A woman reclines beside you, her hair unpinned, her eyes half closed. The day has been long, servants dismissed, duties postponed. This is her 1 hour of true possession. She reaches beneath the pillow, draws out a folded paper. A letter, a sketch, maybe the outline of a poem she'll never sign. The bed is her desk, her sanctuary. Here's your quirky tidbit. In 18th century France, elite women sometimes received visitors in bed. It was called the lever or coucher, rituals of rising and retiring. Friends, servants, even ambassadors attended while the lady of the house sat propped among cushions, dressed in fine linen and lace. She held court from her pillows. Imagine discussing politics while still half swaddled in blankets. That's power in slippers. You laugh softly, because who among us hasn't answered emails from bed declaring invisible dominion over the world while under a comforter? Different tools, same spirit. But the bed was also a stage for endurance. Think of the lying-in periods after childbirth, 6 weeks where women were confined to their rooms to recover. The windows shaded, the world muted. Some used that time to bond, to heal. Others felt it like imprisonment. Historians still argue whether it was a kindness or a cage. Yet even then, women found agency in stillness. They told stories to each other, embroidered blankets for their children, whispered names for the future. In those quiet beds, surrounded by lace and candlelight, they made plans for lives they weren't yet allowed to live. You run a fingertip across the lace border. Each loop and knot is handmade, a geometry of patience. Lace-making itself was once a form of survival, women in convents, cottages, and cities earning pennies per inch. Their eyes strained, their fingers bled, yet they created beauty meant to adorn the very class system that kept them poor. Still, those stitches outlasted kingdoms. The lace endures, whispering the names of those who wove it. You stretch beneath the canopy and let your gaze wander upward. The ceiling beams curve like ribs, the room feels alive. Sleep doesn't come easily yet. It never did for women of the past. They listened for footsteps, for bobbies crying, for dawn bells. Rest was never guaranteed. It had to be defended. Here's a story for you. In 1895, an English housewife wrote in her journal, "I close my door and pretend to nap. It is my only hour of freedom." She wasn't sleeping, she was surviving. The bed, her silent accomplice. And maybe that's why, even today, so many of us retreat to bed not only when we're tired, but when the world feels heavy. Because the bed remembers. It carries the echoes of centuries of women who dared to lie down when everything told them to stand up. The lace curtain stirs again. You imagine the faint hum of insects outside, the rhythm of your breath aligning with those who came before. The canopy becomes a sky, the sheets an ocean. Somewhere between consciousness and dream, you realize that rest has always been political. There's a soft joke lingering here. You think, if beds could talk, they'd probably need therapy. But maybe they already do. Maybe the creaks and sighs, the shifting linens, are their way of exhaling centuries of secrets. The night folds tighter. You reach toward the edge of the bed where the lace dips low, and through that veil of fabric the world looks blurred. Gentler, slower, almost merciful. You exhale. You feel it now, the lace isn't just decoration. It's the dream itself, the threshold between waking and rest, duty and self, noise and quiet rebellion. So you pull it closer, let the world dim, and finally you rest. Not because the day is done, but because you've remembered that you have the right to stop. The next morning arrives, but you don't wake in the usual sense. You drift up slowly, like someone surfacing from deep water. The lace curtain glows with filtered sunlight, and for a moment you think it's a halo. Dust motes turn to tiny golden stars, and you lie still, watching them. Morning light, soft as milk, spreads across the bed, and you can almost hear the centuries breathing with you. You stretch lazily, unapologetically. The room feels different now, awake but not yet alert. The echoes of women's mornings past swirl around you. Maids lighting fires, mothers stirring porridge, queens summoning ladies in waiting. Every woman had her own version of the start of the day, but the rhythm of care, always care, bound them together. You swing your legs over the edge and feel the chill of the floorboards. That little shiver reminds you you're alive. Outside, a faint noise, a rooster, maybe, or the whisper of a distant street vendor, filters through the lace. This is where the day truly begins, beneath the curtain's soft veil, when the world starts demanding and you decide how much to give. Here's your mainstream historical fact. During the Victorian era, the morning toilette became a performance of both hygiene and identity. Women brushed their hair 100 strokes, applied cold cream, and washed with rosewater in delicate porcelain basins. These rituals weren't just about cleanliness. They were about control in a world that offered little of it. You picture yourself before a small mirror, its surface warped slightly, so your reflection seems to breathe. You run a comb through your hair, hear the crackle of static, smell the faint sweetness of lavender oil. Somewhere in this ritual, you feel something ancient stir, the reminder that tending to yourself isn't vanity, it's reclamation. You grin because, let's be honest, some of those routines were absurd. 18th century beauty manuals recommended sleeping with raw beef or lead cream on the face to preserve youth. Imagine explaining that to your dermatologist. Yet beneath the absurdity lies a deeper truth. The morning ritual was a woman's negotiation with the world. How much armor to wear today? How visible to be? How much of herself to offer? You think of Renaissance women rising before dawn to braid hair and bind corsets, their maids fastening stays so tight that the morning air barely reached their lungs. They didn't call it self-care, but it was a version of it, painful, complicated, and strategic. Historians still argue whether these routines were acts of submission or small rebellions disguised as duty. You lean closer to the imaginary mirror, watching light ripple through the lace. Maybe it's both. Maybe every act of grooming has always been half defiance, half survival. Your quirky tidbit. In the 19th century, a Parisian inventor designed a mechanical hairbrush powered by clockwork gears. It promised to polish hair to mirror sheen in record time, provided you didn't mind the occasional pulled strand or mild whirring sound near your scalp. It didn't last long, but the idea that technology could make a woman's morning easier lingered. Centuries later, you hold your modern blow dryer and realize you're part of the same lineage of innovation and exhaustion. You wrap a shawl around your shoulders and pad toward the window. The lace curtain catches in your hand, its threads cool against your skin. Through the mesh, the day looks manageable, still soft around the edges. You lift a corner, peek outside, then let it fall again. That simple act, deciding how much light to let in, is ancient. Women have been doing it for millennia, measuring safety against sunlight. You think of monastic mornings when nuns rose before dawn to chant. Their curtains were plain linen, not lace, but the sentiment was the same. Control the light, control the rhythm of the soul. Some of them sewed lace as meditation, turning thread into prayer. Each loop a word, each not a confession. You imagine sitting beside one of them now, your hands clumsy compared to hers. She smiles, adjusts your grip, tells you that the secret to good lace isn't speed, it's breath. You have to exhale as you pull each thread taut. You have to let the rhythm match your heartbeat. You try, and suddenly the room feels slower, safer. You joke quietly to yourself. Guess breathing exercises were vintage all along. But there's truth in that humor. Breath, lace, light, all three are boundaries you control. The outside world will always come rushing in eventually. The expectations, the noise, the endless shoulds. Yet here, for this morning moment, you get to choose the pace. You think of Jane Austen's heroines writing letters before breakfast, of Frida Kahlo painting her pain from bed, of the unnamed washerwomen who watched sunlight through fabric lines and found it briefly beautiful. Across centuries, the ritual of mourning has been less about productivity and more about preservation. You pour water into a bowl. The sound, soft, round, familiar, fills the space. You dip your fingers in and touch your face. The water feels holy. It's the same water every woman has used in some form since the beginning of time. Rivers, wells, basins, sinks, all mirrors of a kind. Historians still argue whether mourning domestic routines were instruments of oppression or quiet empowerment. But as you watch the droplets slide down your wrists, you sense the answer isn't binary. The truth is in the small decision to look at yourself kindly in the morning light. That's where power begins. And perhaps that's the hidden wisdom beneath every lace curtain. This notion that privacy is a right, not a luxury. That the space between waking and giving, between softness and performance, is where identity regenerates. You turn from the window. The room is warmer now, fuller. You pick up a hairpin, a comb, maybe a pen. The objects of mourning, they're not just tools, they're declarations. They say, I am here and I will prepare myself on my own terms. And if someone were to ask what you're doing, you'd shrug lightly and say, nothing much, just getting ready. But beneath that, the truth hums quietly. You're building armor out of softness. You make your bed loosely, rebelliously, a small act of order before the day starts. The lace curtain sways as if approving. You pause for one last glance at the filtered light and whisper something you don't fully realize you're saying. I belong here. Then you step forward into the day, into the lineage of every woman who's ever greeted the morning through a veil of lace, half awake, wholly herself. You walk away from the window and the morning's gentleness begins to thin, like mist surrendering to sun. Beyond the lace, the world stirs with the sounds of labor, brooms sweeping cobblestones, market carts clattering, someone's baby crying from an unseen courtyard. You breathe in, and the air smells faintly of flour and iron and soap. The rhythm of women's work has begun again, just as it has for centuries. You step into it carefully, like wading into a river that never stops moving. In every age, women's rest was borrowed from work, their reflection caught between chores. The past didn't always allow for idleness, but it found ways to weave stillness into repetition. The kneading of bread, the washing of linens, the folding of clothes. Tasks that looked ordinary from afar were often meditations in disguise. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In 18th and 19th century households, laundry day was both dreaded and sacred. Women spent entire days hauling water, boiling linens in cauldrons, scrubbing them on boards until their hands split. Yet for many, it was the one time they gathered, sang songs, exchanged news, shared strength. The wash house became a confessional of sorts, with steam as its incense. You imagine it now, a row of women, sleeves rolled, faces glowing red from the heat. They laugh despite the ache, their voices echoing against stone walls. You pick up a bar of soap, thick and pale, and feel its weight, a small promise that clean things can still exist. The scent of lye bites the air, sharp but honest. One woman glances over her shoulder and smiles at you. You from the future, she jokes. You grin and nod. Do we still do this, she asks. You hesitate because your laundry hums inside a sleek metal box that does the work without song, without gathering. Sort of, you reply, but we don't sing anymore. She shakes her head. Pity. You laugh softly, but something in that exchange lingers. Work has become quieter, lonelier. Progress, it seems, has traded community for convenience. Here's your quirky tidbit. In the 17th century, English women believed that drying linens under the full moon would purify them spiritually. Some even left lace veils on hedges overnight to collect moonlight, convinced it made the fabric glow. You picture it, yards of linen shimmering in silver beams, a ghostly garden of dreams. There's poetry in that, even if it makes your modern self chuckle. Historians still argue whether domestic labor empowered women through skill or trapped them through repetition. But as you wring out an invisible sheet, feeling the twist ripple through your arms, you realize both might be true. There's dignity in the doing, even when the world refuses to name it. You pause to wipe your brow, and for a moment the air cools. The lace curtain flutters again in your memory. It's still there, back in your private room, waiting. That's where rest hides between the cycles of work. The curtain isn't just lace, it's a boundary between survival and selfhood. You think of women who embroidered by candlelight after long days, using needle and thread to reclaim an inch of their own minds. Samplers stitched with tiny alphabets and prayers, delicate monograms hidden in hems. Each stitch whispered, "I was here." You picture one of those samplers now, initials blooming like secret flowers beneath a hoop. You whisper another quiet joke, imagine Instagram for embroidery, everyone flexing their cross-stitch skills. You smile, but it's tender, not mocking, because those stitches were posts of a different kind, messages to the future, to anyone who'd ever pause long enough to see them. You walk further down the imagined street into a courtyard where a young maid takes a brief rest, sitting on the steps with her apron bunched around her knees. She closes her eyes, face tilted toward the sun. For just 1 minute, she's no one's servant. The light turns her lashes to gold. You realize that's what rest looked like for most women in history: stolen, fleeting, defiant. The sound of clogs on cobblestone pulls you back. Noon approaches. Kitchens fill with smells, onions frying, broth simmering, bread rising, the music of care. You're reminded that even feeding others was once considered an art, not a burden. Recipes were treasures passed hand to hand, not measured by precision but by instinct. A handful of this, until it looks right. Historians still argue whether those recipes were genuine creativity or another form of unpaid labor. But when you think of a mother stirring soup and humming under her breath, you suspect the answer again lies in the middle. It was both duty and devotion. You let your mind wander to a medieval kitchen, massive hearth, iron pots, smoke curling up like prayer. A woman stirs porridge, her arms steady, her rhythm unbroken. Her daughter tugs at her skirt and she laughs softly. You feel the warmth of that moment radiate across time. Then you step back into your own century and notice your hands, idle now, clean and empty. For a moment, you almost miss the tactile rhythm of that imagined work, the soap, the starch, the stitching. Maybe that's why modern rest feels hollow sometimes. We've forgotten the satisfaction of making. You return indoors to your bedchamber and lift the lace curtain once more. It hangs quietly, innocent of all this reflection. Yet behind its intricate pattern, you see the outline of every woman who ever paused mid-task and thought, "I need a minute." You touch the fabric, and in that touch, centuries compress. You think of all those whose rest was rationed, whose peace was permissionless. You whisper to them, not words, but a kind of understanding. And when you finally lie down again, the scent of soap and sunlight still clinging to your skin, you realize that rest doesn't have to mean stillness. It can live in motion too, in the fold of linen, the swirl of spoon, the hum of labor done gently. You close your eyes, and somewhere between dream and memory, you hear the echo of those washhouse songs again, voices rising through steam, laughter cutting through exhaustion. You join them silently. Because even now, beneath your lace curtain, their rhythm continues. The sun has barely dipped when you notice it, the shift in the air, the hush that settles on a house once the last dish is dried, the fire tamped down, the footsteps upstairs softened into nighttime creaks. Evening has a different texture than morning. Morning nudges you awake, evening folds around you like a shawl. And tonight, you feel that shawl tighten as you step toward a room much sterner than your bedchamber, the doctor's domain. Not a modern clinic with glossy pamphlets and soft jazz, but a dim 19th century drawing room where a physician in a tall collar peers over wire-rimmed spectacles, diagnosing a world he doesn't fully understand. This, you realize, is the birthplace of one of history's strangest treatments for women, the rest cure. A cure that required rest sounds lovely at first blush. You, me, anyone over the age of 10 would probably volunteer, but the way it was practiced, that's where the story twists. You step deeper into the room and suddenly you're lying on a stiff bed covered in heavy blankets, the lace curtains drawn not for comfort but containment. The doctor insists you lie still. No reading, no writing, no visitors, no movement except what's necessary to keep you alive. Excessive thought, he mutters, exhausts the female system. You raise an eyebrow. Excessive thought. So, having a brain was a medical liability. You almost laugh, but the room feels too heavy. You recognize this place from women's memoirs, from whispered legends. This is where creativity was pathologized, where ambition was called illness, where rest was weaponized. Here's your mainstream fact. The rest cure was invented in the late 1800s by Dr. Silas Weir Mitchell, an American neurologist who believed that neurasthenia, an umbrella term for stress, sadness, or basically any emotion he didn't approve of, could be treated with isolation, forced feeding, and absolute inactivity. He prescribed it primarily to women. And here's your quiet joke for the moment. If someone tried to medically forbid you from using your phone today, you'd probably file a lawsuit within the hour. But in 1890, a woman's only rebellion might be a journal hidden between mattress layers. You shift beneath the imaginary blankets, feeling how the weight does soothe. It smothers. The lace curtain flutters, but you're not allowed to stand and draw it fully open. The outside world blurs behind it. You feel your own breath deepen, not because you're relaxed, but because your mind is scrambling for space. Historians still argue whether Mitchell's cure actually helped in rare cases or harmed almost everyone. Some women swore it steadied their nerves. Others, like the writer Charlotte Perkins Gilman, felt it nearly destroyed them. Gilman turned her experience into the famous short story The Yellow Wallpaper, a thinly veiled critique of the rest cure. She wrote in secret, defying the very treatment designed to silence her. You imagine her now, pale, frustrated, lying in a room with that infamous wallpaper swirling around her. She wasn't allowed to write, but she wrote anyway. She wasn't allowed to think, but she thought anyway. She wasn't allowed to resist, but she did. That's the part the doctor never predicted. Women turn restriction into revelation. Your quirky tidbit: some rest cure patients were prescribed gallons, literal gallons, of milk per day. Mitchell believed milk stabilized nerves. So imagine lying motionless, bored beyond reason, and being handed yet another tumbler of warm milk. That alone could drive a person to revolution. You exhale slowly, trying to understand. What the doctors called rest wasn't rest at all. It was erasure. It was the attempted silencing of inner worlds too vibrant for their comfort. But here, where the story bends toward hope, women adapted. They always did. Some secretly exercised their minds by reciting poems or calculating numbers in their heads. Others observed the world from their beds, mapping the patterns of sunlight, memorizing the movements of curtains, tracing imaginary stories on the ceiling beams. Even in forced stillness, their thoughts refused to be contained. You shift to another century now, forward, but not far enough. Early 20th century sanatoriums rise in your imagination, perched on high hills overlooking forests or seas. Women are sent there for nerves, melancholy, or the dreaded female hysteria. You see long porches lined with wicker loungers, patients wrapped in blankets, staring out at endless horizons. Here's the paradox: some of them genuinely needed rest. Their lives were ceaseless cycles of labor, childbearing, domestic duty, emotional caretaking. A month of quiet might have been healing, But when rest is prescribed as punishment, its softness hardens. You step into one of those sanatoriums and walk along the porch. A woman in a shawl looks at you, eyes bright with boredom and longing. "Do you read?" she asks. She says it like possession of a forbidden magic. You nod. She smiles, a fragile spark of rebellion. Historians still argue whether the rise of sanatoriums reflected genuine concern for women's health or the medicalization of normal emotional exhaustion. Probably both. Society created the conditions that crushed women's spirits, then invented institutions to treat them. You feel the weight of that truth as you walk further. Lace curtains hang over the windows here too, thin, gauzy, less decorative than symbolic. A soft barrier between the women and the world they've been told they're unfit to face. But inside these rooms, something else is happening. Quiet revolutions are brewing. Women journal in the margins of approved texts. They whisper to one another during supervised walks. They form alliances, friendships, sometimes even political ideas. It's no coincidence that early feminist groups included women who had experienced rest cures. They learned firsthand how confinement breeds clarity. You sit on a wicker chair and let the afternoon breeze brush your face. You close your eyes and feel the boundary between rest and resistance blur. You realize that rest is only healing when it is chosen. Forced stillness is a cage. Chosen stillness is a sanctuary. And that distinction is everything. You picture a woman in the 1920s opening her sanatorium window at night, breaking rules for the sake of a single lungful of cool night air. She pulls the lace curtain aside, leans into the moonlight and whispers her own name, reminding herself she's still here. It is the smallest rebellion and the most profound. In your own time, rest looks different. Yoga mats, apps that remind you to breathe, weighted blankets that actually soothe instead of imprison. But even now, the world tells you to go faster, produce more, perform endlessly. So maybe you're not as far from those women as you thought. You smile faintly at the thought. If the past had ASMR videos, rest cures might have backfired spectacularly. Imagine a 19th century patient whispering, "Doctor, I am resting, it's for my mental health," while wearing earbuds sculpted from whale bone or something equally cursed. But the humor doesn't hide the truth. Rest has always been political. Who gets to rest? Who is denied rest? Who is punished for needing rest? These questions echo through every century. You rise from the imaginary bed and shake off the blankets. The lace curtain stirs again, and this time you go to it. You touch the fabric. It feels lighter now, not a barrier, but a reminder. Rest isn't something to fear. It's something to reclaim. You draw the curtain open. Light spills in, warm gold honest. And as it touches your face, you realize something quietly triumphant. Women throughout history didn't just endure the rest cure, they transformed it. They turned forced reflection into genuine insight. They took stillness, the thing meant to silence them, and used it to hear themselves more clearly. You step into that light now, part of their lineage, carrying their whispered refusals forward. And beneath the lace curtain, the truth shines softly. Rest is only rest when it belongs to you. The curtain still breathes, fluttering with the late evening wind, but now the world beyond it feels different, quieter, not in silence but in surrender. You step closer, and the edges of the fabric glow amber as lamplight from the street filters through. Shadows ripple across the wall like passing ghosts of thought. It's the hour of reflection, the time when a house exhales, when minds soften, and when the noise of the day dissolves into something that almost sounds like peace. You sit down again, and the bed accepts you without question. The lace curtain shivers slightly, as if it remembers everything you've just learned. The work, the cures, the strange ways the past mistook stillness for submission. You inhale, feeling that faint trace of starch and candle soot that always clung to old fabric. The air smells lived in, intimate, human. This, you realize, is what reflection feels like, half memory, half body. You lean back, eyes half closed. In your mind, centuries unfold like pages. You see women of every age sitting at their own thresholds, by windows near fires in quiet corners, thinking, dreaming, planning. For them, reflection wasn't a hobby, it was survival. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the 18th and 19th centuries, women's diaries and letters became one of the most important records of domestic life. Since they were excluded from political and academic spaces, their journals became private salons of thought. They reflected on everything, from household budgets to philosophy, from love to mortality. Historians now rely on those diaries to reconstruct how women truly lived. You imagine opening one now, the pages thin and translucent, the ink fading but the voice still sharp. I have had too much time to think today, and yet not enough. The handwriting loops delicately, as if the words themselves are trying to escape the margins. It's strange how familiar that feels. The centuries dissolve when a sentence still sounds like you. But reflection wasn't always welcome. For much of history, a thinking woman was a dangerous concept. She was eccentric, hysterical, unfeminine, suspiciously self-contained. You laugh softly, if only they knew how many revolutions began in quiet bedrooms with lace curtains drawn tight. Your quirky tidbit. In the 17th century, women in France formed what were called salons précieuses, gatherings of intellectuals hosted in private homes. They discuss art, poetry, and philosophy, but with a twist. They set their own conversational rules, often banning vulgarity and insisting on wit and elegance. Some male scholars mocked them as too delicate, but these salons shaped entire literary movements. Imagine sipping tea in a gown that weighs more than your opinions, while casually inventing the modern novel. You smile. There's comfort in knowing that reflection has always found its own disguises. When society said, "Don't think," women built rituals that looked like leisure but were really strategy. Sewing circles doubled as debate clubs. Tea time became the university that never admitted them. Even gossip, dismissed as trivial chatter, was often coded social critique, the only way to discuss injustice safely. Historians still argue whether women's domestic reflection was a form of passive retreat or active resistance. But when you listen closely to those diaries, those whispered conversations, you can almost hear the gears of history turning quietly beneath the surface. You shift your position, pulling the coverlet to your chin. The night has deepened, the air cooler now. The lace curtain moves as if breathing with you, each thread catching the lamplight like veins of gold. You feel how thin it is, how fragile, and yet how it endures. You think of mirrors again, how reflection isn't just mental, it's literal. In the 19th century, mirrors became affordable for the first time, changing how people saw themselves. Before that, reflection was rare, fleeting, a puddle, a polished bowl, a bit of glass. When women finally had mirrors in their rooms, they didn't just see their faces, they saw possibilities. Some historians argue that this new self-visibility changed everything: fashion, psychology, even independence. To see oneself clearly was to realize one existed beyond function. To meet your own eyes was a quiet revolution. You lean forward, picturing one of those mirrors now, a small, cloudy oval resting on a dresser. A woman sits before it, candlelight flickering across her face. She studies her reflection, not out of vanity but curiosity. Who am I when no one is watching? That's the question, isn't it? The one buried beneath lace and centuries and expectation. The one that trembles on the edge of every reflection. You trace invisible patterns on the blanket. The room hums faintly, pipes, night insects, your own pulse. You realize how reflection always carries a rhythm. Even now, as you think about the past, your breathing syncs with theirs, the diarists, the dreamers, the ones who found liberation in the act of noticing themselves. You laugh under your breath. Who knew self-awareness was such an ancient hobby? But there's tenderness in that humor, because the truth is, every woman who stopped to think, who paused, who journaled, who simply stared into space, was claiming time. And time, for women, has never been neutral. To sit still and think in a world that demands endless giving is to perform a quiet, radical act. The lace curtain ripples again, this time with a rhythm that matches your heartbeat. You reach up and touch it gently, feeling how thin it is, yet how much it holds. That's reflection in its purest form, fragile but full of meaning, beautiful but woven from labor. You recall one more story before the night slips further. In the early 1900s, a group of women writers in London formed what they called the Midnight Society. They met in each other's bedrooms after the city slept, reading drafts by lamplight, discussing ideas too daring for daylight. One of them once wrote, "Night gives us permission to be the people we cannot be by day." You let that line settle in your mind. It feels personal, like a whisper meant for you. Maybe that's why night and reflection always belong together. When everything else quiets, your own thoughts can finally speak in full sentences. Historians still argue whether the age of domestic reflection truly empowered women or merely romanticized their confinement. But you sense that the answer, as always, lives somewhere in the in-between. Reflection wasn't freedom, but it was rehearsal. The curtain wasn't escape, but it was training in privacy. You close your eyes and see them, hundreds of women across time, sitting by the same kind of filtered light, asking the same unanswerable question. What do I owe myself? You don't have the answer either, but you know this. Every reflection, every moment of pause, every thought scribbled in secret led somewhere, to classrooms, to suffrage halls, to art studios, to you. You pull the curtain slightly aside and let the night in. Cool air brushes your face. The world outside is dark but not hostile, just waiting. You whisper softly, "I am still here." The lace stirs once more as though answering yes, and so are we. Night deepens now and the room hums with that soft, domestic kind of silence. The faint creak of a floorboard, the whisper of fabric as you shift, the occasional sigh of the house settling. You lie back against the pillows and the lace curtain catches a sliver of moonlight, turning its threads into silver veins. The effect is hypnotic, and for a moment you feel suspended between centuries. You think about sleep, about rest beyond mere stillness. In the past, sleep wasn't always a refuge. Sometimes it was labor, sometimes vigilance, sometimes fear. Still, women found ways to inhabit it with quiet courage. In Tudor England, noblewomen slept in beds surrounded by canopies not only for warmth but for privacy. Yet attendants were often present, keeping watch for the slightest disturbance. Privacy was provisional, security a careful negotiation. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In 18th century France, bedding became a form of status display. Feather mattresses, embroidered linens, and ornate canopies weren't just luxurious. They communicated rank, lineage, and authority. Sleeping well was intertwined with power, as strange as that sounds. But beyond wealth, women invented intimate rituals around rest. They scented pillows with lavender to calm restless spirits, tucked small charms into mattress seams for protection, and sometimes carried a token of a loved one to cradle through the night. These practices weren't mere superstition. They were acts of self-possession, subtle attempts to carve agency in a world that limited it. You reach for the edge of the lace curtain. The threads feel like something alive under your fingertips, delicate but persistent. You imagine women centuries ago brushing it aside before settling into bed, taking a moment to breathe before the demands of duty pressed in again. Quirky tidbit. In parts of early modern Italy, it was believed that sleeping with one's feet pointed northward would protect against nightmares. So, beds were oriented according to compass directions, family superstition, and occasionally aesthetic whim. Imagine trying to argue with that in a dorm room today. Historians still argue whether these bedtime customs were forms of empowerment or passive compliance. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. Ritualized rest offered control within constraints, turning the ordinary act of sleep into a subtle rebellion. You think about segmented sleep, the norm for much of history. People didn't always sleep in one continuous block. They slept in two phases: first sleep, waking for an hour or two, then second sleep. During that quiet interlude, women often whispered to each other, wrote, prayed, or plotted. This interlude, historians suggest, was a sacred pause, a liminal space where ordinary domestic life dissolved and the mind roamed freely. You drift into imagining a 17th century bedroom lit by a single candle. A woman lies awake during the first sleep, listening to the night creak around her. She writes in a small journal, sketches the moonlight on the wall, or plans letters she'll never send. The candle flickers, shadow and light dancing on her walls. She feels herself alive in a way daytime never allows. You chuckle softly, because segmented sleep today would ruin your Netflix binge schedule. Yet there's beauty in this lost rhythm. Nights structured not by obligation, but by the quiet interplay between rest and wakefulness. Your mind drifts again. You consider bedtime objects: a small glass of water, a handkerchief tucked beneath a pillow, a prayer bead. Each item carried stories, protection, memories. You realize women used these items like talismans, not just for comfort, but to assert the right to a night that belonged to them. You let your fingers trace the quilt's embroidery, imagining the thousands of hands that sewed, stitched, and repaired over centuries. Thread by thread, they wove care, resilience, and hope into every seam. Sleeping on such a quilt was more than comfort. It was an inheritance of quiet strength. Here's a joke to lighten the night. Some 19th century manuals warned that talking in sleep could indicate moral corruption. So, women whispered to themselves at night, just to keep up appearances. Even in dreams, the world demanded performance. You exhale slowly, imagining what it would be like to truly lie down without expectation, to rest in a way unconstrained by judgment or labor. This is the lesson lace curtains have carried across generations, that sleep is sacred, and rest, when claimed deliberately, is revolutionary. And in this soft, shadowed room, you feel it, how women learned to cultivate night as sanctuary, how they transformed beds, blankets, and quilts into instruments of reflection, imagination, and survival, how sleep became a territory they could inhabit fully, if only briefly, and leave untouched by the world's demands. You let your eyes close briefly, imagining those centuries of women resting in secret, drawing the night around themselves like a cloak, claiming, if only for a few hours, the liberty to simply be. And as you do, the lace curtain sways gently in agreement, a whisper of soft, persistent rebellion in every thread. The night stretches on, and you feel the slow pulse of hours as something tactile, almost like silk sliding over skin. The room around you, the bed, the lace curtain, the faint smell of candle smoke, is no longer just a setting. It's a vessel holding centuries of women who have rested, reflected, and reclaimed themselves within its delicate boundaries. You breathe in slowly, letting the memory of their nights weave into your own. You roll onto your side and notice how the light catches differently now. Not sunlight, not harsh lamp glow, but a subtle luminescence. Maybe moonlight, maybe imagination. In it, you see women you've never met. A seamstress pausing mid-stitch to notice the curve of her own hand. A governess leaning against a windowsill at midnight. The shadows of lace curtains brushing her face like a private acknowledgement of selfhood. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the late 19th century, the concept of the women's private room became more common in middle and upper-class homes. Previously, chambers were shared with children, relatives, or servants, and privacy was a luxury. The private room was more than comfort. It was the literal space where a woman could think, write, or plan, free from constant oversight. You imagine yourself in such a room. The bed neatly made, a small desk with scattered papers, a candle guttering in a brass holder. You feel the thrill of small autonomy, knowing that in this small sphere, your decisions, your routines, your thoughts are yours alone. But privacy has always been a dance with rules. Lace curtains, again, serve as both shields and symbols. They let you see without being seen, framing your world while preserving it. The act of drawing or leaving them open was often loaded with meaning. You probably wouldn't notice it today, but for women of previous centuries, the curtain's position could speak volumes about availability, mood, or social standing. Quirky tidbit. In 18th century England, some women actually trained small birds to sit on curtain rods, believing that their songs at dawn brought protection and fortune. You picture it now, a tiny orchestra perched above a sleeping chamber, singing in harmony with human hearts. Historians still argue whether private rooms and curtains genuinely empowered women or simply concealed their labor and limitations from the world. But in practice, even small pockets of autonomy mattered. The space to rest, to reflect, to decide the day's pace. This was revolutionary in its own quiet way. You lie back, tracing imaginary patterns in the air, and consider the invisible networks women created within these private chambers. Letter writing, journaling, embroidery, music, secret conversations through thin walls, all strategies for claiming agency. These acts weren't always recognized by the world, but they shaped it. You picture a 19th century woman composing a letter by candlelight, words flowing onto paper she can fold, hide, or post. Each letter is a bridge to another mind, a claim of visibility and thought. Each line is both intimate and subversive. And then there's sound, the hush of the room punctuated by small noises, fingers tapping, candles hissing, floorboards creaking under someone else's careful step. In these hushed chambers, silence becomes a participant. It witnesses, supports, and sometimes conspires. Your quiet joke. Some etiquette manuals warned women not to laugh too loudly in private rooms, lest they seem frivolous or immodest. You can't help but grin at the absurdity. Even rebellion had to be quiet and carefully measured. You realize the lesson is clear. Empowerment often lives in small, deliberate acts. Drawing a curtain, writing a note, arranging a pillow just so, each gesture asserts presence. It tells the world I exist and this moment is mine. And you, lying beneath your lace canopy, tracing shadows across the wall, feel a profound kinship with these women. Their strategies, their routines, their private rebellions, they are stitched into the very fabric of your evening. The air cools further. You hug the blanket, feeling its weight as a comforting anchor. You think about how many women rested in similar beds, under similar curtains, for whom sleep and reflection were acts of survival, not indulgence. And somewhere in that thought, you recognize a continuum. Every careful breath, every stolen moment of stillness, every whispered plan or hidden sketch is a thread linking you to centuries of women who quietly, persistently reclaimed themselves. You close your eyes, listening to the room, the night, and the memory of countless other rooms filled with women's quiet triumphs. The room darkens further now, but it is a comforting darkness, soft and pliant, folding around you like a familiar quilt. You feel the weight of the day, of the centuries, settle onto your shoulders, not as burden but as shared experience. Every sigh in history, every whispered thought, every stolen hour of selfhood has condensed into this moment. And the lace curtain still moves, fluttering in the faintest draft, as if acknowledging the ongoing story. You trace the outline of the pillow, feeling its softness, imagining all the women who have rested on similar shapes, clutching tiny tokens of memory, lockets, embroidered handkerchiefs, scraps of letters. The act of laying one's head down, of surrendering even briefly to sleep, has always been loaded with intention. Even in shared chambers, even under surveillance, women claimed a fraction of control over their nights. Here's your mainstream historical fact. By the 19th century, nightcaps, hats worn to bed, were common, not just for warmth but as an instrument of modesty and protection. They prevented hair from tangling and kept women's elaborate hairstyles intact. You can imagine the early mornings spent peeling them off, and the relief of brushing out what the night had compressed. Something as mundane as a nightcap held centuries of domestic knowledge. You imagine one such woman, sitting by a candle, adjusting her cap with careful fingers. Perhaps she hums softly, the melody bouncing off walls lined with lace curtains, her mind moving silently between the domestic, the emotional, and the intellectual. Her nightcap is a marker of survival, a tiny emblem of agency. Quirky tidbit. In some parts of Victorian England, women believed sleeping with a tiny piece of rosemary beneath their pillow could improve memory or ward off nightmares. You picture an entire bed stuffed with fragrant herbs, the aroma curling into dreams, an early, aromatic version of meditation. Historians still argue whether such rituals were purely superstitious or if they functioned psychologically as early coping mechanisms. Either way, they illustrate women's ingenuity in creating spaces of mental safety. You lie back, letting the blanket curl around your legs. You picture a series of rooms stretching across Europe, North America, Asia, women everywhere finding private sanctuaries where reflection, creativity, and self-care could coexist. The lace curtain is a motif across all these rooms, a delicate boundary separating interior from exterior, control from chaos. You shift in bed and think of modern parallels. Weighted blankets, sleep masks, blackout curtains, ambient sound machines. The tools have evolved, but the human desire for protected, restorative space remains constant. You can almost feel the echoes of centuries aligning with your own rhythm. You consider the concept of mental housekeeping, the deliberate act of tidying thoughts, cataloging memories, plotting dreams. Women's nightly rituals, long ignored by historical accounts, often performed exactly that function. The lace curtain, the pillow, the nightly herbs or journals, they are the implements of inner order. You whisper a joke softly to yourself. I bet some ancestor of mine would raise an eyebrow at my blue light blocking glasses. But humor aside, you sense the continuity. Those small acts, nightly, private, intentional, are revolutionary. Not loud, not public, but persistent, lasting, and deeply human. You feel the slow crawl of time, the gentle pulse of night around you. Every act of resting, reflecting, and recording in history has converged in this quiet moment. You realize that the lace curtain is more than fabric. It's a mnemonic device, holding memory, protection, secrecy, and autonomy simultaneously. You drift slightly, letting your mind wander along invisible threads connecting you to women centuries past. A seamstress tucking away a poem, a governess staring out a window while children sleep, a mother whispering a lullaby into the quiet night. Each breath, each gesture, a bridge across time. Historians still debate how much of these nightly acts constituted genuine empowerment versus adaptation to restriction. But as you close your eyes, listening to the quiet rhythm of the house and your own heartbeat, it doesn't matter. You feel the legacy of those women's reclamation flowing through you, intimate and unbroken. And in that gentle dark beneath the lace curtain, you discover a profound truth. Reflection and rest are intertwined, and claiming them, truly claiming them, is an act of survival, creativity, and resistance all at once. You exhale, sinking deeper into the quilt. The night is yours, shared only with the women who quietly forged the same terrain across centuries. The lace sways slightly in affirmation. The night deepens even further, and you feel yourself suspended between wakefulness and sleep, a liminal space where thought stretches and curves in unexpected ways. The lace curtain brushes softly against your arm as you shift, and the room feels impossibly vast for its modest dimensions. You sense that you are not alone. Centuries of women's whispers, sighs, and careful planning hang in the air like invisible threads. You think of their ambitions, often quiet, sometimes suppressed, yet persistent. Women in the 18th and 19th centuries cultivated knowledge, art, and political awareness within the private spaces available to them. The curtain, the chamber, the journal, all became shields and instruments, tools to protect what could not yet be publicly expressed. Mainstream historical fact. During the Victorian era, the rise of domestic magazines provided women with a subtle form of education. They could read essays on science, literature, and philosophy disguised as domestic advice. Knowledge, like lace, was layered, delicate on the surface but robust beneath. You picture a young woman poring over one such magazine, candlelight flickering, her hands clasping the pages like fragile wings. Each article offers a glimpse of the wider world, yet the constraints of decorum remain omnipresent. Her mind stretches outward while her body remains confined, a paradox that countless women have navigated. Quirky tidbit. Some Victorian women used tiny mirrors hidden in their lapboards to study facial expressions and practice public speaking in private, perfecting gestures and rhetoric that society denied them the chance to deploy openly. You imagine these miniature mirrors reflecting determination and quiet mischief simultaneously. Historians still argue whether these domestic networks, magazines, salons, or private tutoring truly empowered women intellectually or merely channeled their energy into socially acceptable outlets. You sense that the answer is layered, like lace itself. Both constraint and freedom coexisted, and the women navigated that duality with surprising cunning. You lean back into the pillows, tracing patterns in the quilt with your fingertips. The night hums softly outside the window, wind brushing rooftops, leaves whispering, distant footsteps muted by time. You consider the rhythm of these nightly habits, reflection, small learning, private rebellion. All of it builds resilience. All of it layers experience upon experience, each woman teaching the next how to survive and subtly thrive. You chuckle quietly. All that effort just to read about starch techniques and etiquette. Yet beneath the humor lies a truth. Mastery of domestic knowledge often became mastery of self. Every note, stitch, and hidden observation is an act of agency. You think of letters women wrote in the margins of household ledgers, notes tucked into seam allowances, poems penned on scraps of paper under beds. These artifacts were invisible to the outside world but vibrant within the lives of those who created them. Every secret act of reflection was a whisper of autonomy. The lace curtain moves again, stirred by the night air, as if participating in your meditation. You imagine it echoing the movements of women across time, slightly trembling, slightly swaying, always present, always protective. You reach over to the window, feeling the glass cool against your palm. Outside, the moon hangs low and silver, illuminating rooftops and streets you will never walk. Yet through these glimpses, you feel the continuum. Women have always claimed private moments, small victories that ripple beyond their immediate confines. Your quiet joke. Imagine being accused of thinking too much today. You'd probably just nod, sip tea, and mentally file a complaint to the universe. But centuries ago, that accusation could dictate your entire existence. You exhale, noticing how the room has become both anchor and horizon, a space that holds you while pointing outward. You are simultaneously still and expanding, cocooned yet in dialogue with generations of women who learn to inhabit their own minds, bodies, and dreams under watchful eyes. The lesson is simple, profound. Reflection is not luxury, it is survival. Thought is not indulgence, it is power. And the lace curtain, humble yet enduring, is both shield and lens, teaching the same lesson silently across time. You nestle further into the bed, allowing this truth to sink into your bones. The room hums, the night breathes, and the curtain sways like a living memory, linking past, present, and self. You feel the night shift once more, heavier now, slower, as if the hours themselves have thickened into a gentle syrup. The lace curtain, fluttering faintly in the draft, seems to pulse with life, like the heartbeat of the house, or maybe of the women who lived and thought and rested here before you. You notice the quiet insistence of small things, the rustle of fabric, the faint click of floorboards settling, a distant dog barking somewhere across the courtyard. The sounds are ordinary, yet in them you sense centuries of resilience. You think about nighttime labor, the sewing, the bookkeeping, the secret writing that took place after long days of visible labor. These acts were often invisible, tucked into corners, whispered through pages, hidden beneath quilts. The curtain again becomes emblematic, a soft barrier between what must be done and what a woman allows herself to imagine or create. Here's your mainstream historical fact. In the early 20th century, many households had women's work rooms or small chambers where tasks like embroidery, mending, and bookkeeping were performed at night. These rooms, though modest, became centers of intellectual and creative energy. They were safe spaces to practice autonomy, away from constant oversight. You imagine sitting at a small desk, the glow of a single lamp illuminating a journal or embroidery hoop. Your fingers move methodically, but your mind roams freely, plotting, dreaming, contemplating. That freedom, however small, feels like a secret revolution. Quirky tidbit. Some Victorian-era women would write letters in invisible ink made from lemon juice or milk, knowing they could be hidden from prying eyes. Messages of affection, rebellion, or self-reflection were sometimes invisible to everyone except the intended recipient, and occasionally even to the writer herself until the ink was revealed by fire. Historians still argue whether these nocturnal pursuits were genuinely empowering or merely a coping mechanism for structural limitations. You sense the answer is complex, layered, both survival and subtle empowerment, fatigue and cunning, despair and creativity existing simultaneously. You lie back on the pillows, letting the quilt rise and fall with your breathing. You notice how reflection, labor, and creativity often overlapped. Women learned to reclaim time not by resisting work altogether, but by embedding autonomy within it. Mending might become storytelling. Folding laundry could become meditation. Stitching a hem could become a silent manifesto. You think about communal memory, how knowledge was passed quietly between mothers, aunts, neighbors, or even strangers in boarding houses. Advice on remedies, recipes, techniques, and survival strategies circulated orally or in writing, always under the cover of privacy, always within the boundaries of acceptable behavior. You whisper a joke. Imagine swapping life hacks via invisible ink app today. Step 1. Apply lemon juice to your Wi-Fi password. You smile at your own silliness, but the point remains: ingenuity thrives even under constraint. You shift, feeling the weight of history settle alongside your own body. You imagine women in tiny rooms, bathed in lamplight, quietly laying the groundwork for the generations to follow. Every stitch, every word, every thought counted. Every quiet act of reflection or creative work was a declaration. I exist, I think, I matter. The curtain flutters again. You realize it has been teaching you all along. Privacy, reflection, and autonomy are intertwined. Rest is not simply sleep, and reflection is not merely thought. They are acts of reclamation, small victories repeated across generations, stitched into the fabric of domestic life. You hug the quilt closer, feeling both anchored and expansive. Night is no longer just a temporal boundary. It is a continuum, linking the past with your present. You feel yourself as part of that chain of women, holding space, claiming autonomy, nurturing thought, and daring to imagine. And somewhere deep in your chest, you sense the quiet insistence of a truth that has traveled centuries. Reclaiming even the smallest fraction of time, even beneath lace curtains, is a revolutionary act. You exhale slowly, letting the night stretch across your shoulders like a soft, persistent cloak, and feel the comfort in knowing that you are never truly alone in your reflection. The room has grown still but not silent. There's a rhythm here now, subtle and persistent, the exhale of the house, the soft draft teasing the lace curtain, the slow, steady cadence of your own heartbeat. You feel the weight of everything that has come before this moment, centuries of women's work, thought, and quiet defiance pressing gently against your consciousness. And you realize that you too are part of this lineage. A witness, a participant, a caretaker of memory. You trace your fingers across the blanket, feeling the texture of thread spun, stitched, and embroidered long before you existed. Each line, each stitch, each fold carries intention, tiny acts of agency that were often invisible to the world but luminous to the women themselves. You think about how labor, rest, and reflection were inseparable for them, how even the simplest domestic routines became a canvas for autonomy. Mainstream historical fact. In the Victorian and Edwardian periods, women frequently maintained personal diaries and commonplace books, recording everything from financial accounts to philosophical musings, religious reflections, or poetry. These texts were often their only enduring voice in societies that denied them public platforms. You imagine one of those diaries now, pages yellowed with age, ink fading but still legible, the writer's hand both confident and tentative. She records her day, her thoughts, her minor triumphs and small rebellions, knowing the pages will never meet a censor's eye. You can feel the intimacy, the trust, the bravery in those quiet, private words. Quirky tidbit. Some women of the 18th century practiced bedside astronomy, keeping tiny star charts tucked near their pillows. They would map constellations while lying awake, believing that the night sky could guide dreams or inspire clarity. You picture it now. Stars inked delicately on parchment beside a sleeping figure, twinkling quietly in the lamplight. Historians still argue whether these private habits represented genuine empowerment or a way to cope with structural constraints. But the reality is clear. The women who practiced them claimed space for themselves in ways both subtle and profound. You shift under the quilt and think about repetition, how daily chores, nightly reflections, and hidden creative pursuits formed a rhythm that was both survival and subtle education. Even in the absence of recognition, women transmitted knowledge across generations, embedding wisdom into the very fabric of their homes. The lace curtain sways again, more pronounced this time, catching the moonlight and casting intricate patterns across your walls. You feel its metaphorical weight, protection, secrecy, and connection all intertwined. It's a boundary and a bridge, a private portal into thought, memory, and selfhood. You whisper a joke softly to the night. Imagine explaining that all of this, the sewing, the journaling, the night sky observations, was early feminist strategy. You chuckle, and yet the humor underscores the seriousness of the lesson. Creativity and reflection have always been acts of reclamation, no matter how invisible they seem to the world. Your mind drifts to a communal vision, women across centuries, quietly tending to themselves, their work, their minds. Some hummed, some wrote, some stitched, some simply watched the stars. Each act was tiny, almost imperceptible, yet collectively, they shaped the culture, created networks, and preserved wisdom. You exhale, feeling the weight of lineage settle comfortably in your chest. You are part of this continuum now, one more link in the chain of women who have rested, reflected, and reclaimed themselves in moments as small and sacred as the sway of a curtain. The night wraps around you, soft, protective, persistent. You sense the whisper of all those women saying, "You matter, your time matters, your reflection matters." And beneath the lace curtain in this quiet room, you feel it. Every heartbeat, every stitch, every whispered thought, folding seamlessly into your own. The night is soft now, and the room hums with the gentle presence of history and memory. You lie there, feeling the quilt's weight as a protective cocoon, and the lace curtain sways quietly beside you. It's as if the room itself exhales, releasing the tension of centuries into the calm. Let your body sink fully, knowing that stillness is not emptiness but a space full of possibility. You are cradled by the persistence of countless women, their whispers folded into the air around you, their quiet triumphs echoing in the rhythm of your breath. You feel the soft murmur of imagination mingling with memory. Think of all the tiny acts of self-possession that have brought you here. A journal opened under candlelight, a hand stitching a hidden message into a hem, a glance through a carefully drawn curtain. These moments, repeated and preserved, are a testament to resilience. You are connected to them, to their thoughtfulness, their courage, their insistence on claiming even the smallest fraction of autonomy. Slow your breathing. Inhale, noticing the faint scent of fabric, candle, or night air. Exhale, letting the weight of the day, the world, and even the centuries slide away. You are safe. You are present. You are allowed to rest. Let the rhythm of the room, the lace, and the night guide you deeper into ease. Every sensation, the soft folds of fabric, the subtle movement of the curtain, the quiet vibration of your own heartbeat, is a lullaby threaded through time. You are cradled by memory and imagination alike, buoyed by the knowledge that reflection and rest are not luxuries but rights, reclaimed across generations. Let the night hold you, soft and infinite, until thoughts slow, limbs release, and consciousness drifts toward a gentle horizon. Now dim the lights, feel the gentle hum around you, and drift fully into the quiet inheritance of centuries. Your rest is sacred. Your mind is free. And beneath the lace curtain all is calm. Sweet dreams.